In April 1934, notorious outlaw Clyde Barrow wrote to Henry Ford, thanking him for the only car that could outrun the law, the Ford V8. But the truth behind the flathead V8, the engine that drove America, is even wilder. What started as Ford's gamble to put affordable power in every garage nearly bankrupted his empire, unleashed a wave of crime and rebellion, and sparked a horsepower addiction that still shapes America. How did a flawed, secretive engine project turn into the beating heart of hot rods, moonshine legends, and NASCAR greatness? The real story begins where most never look. In the early 1930s, the American car market was split by an impossible gulf. At the top sat Cadillac and Lincoln, their V8-powered machines gleaming in showroom windows, priced at $4,000 or more, out of reach for nearly everyone but the elite. For the average family, a new Chevrolet or Ford meant a 4- or 6-cylinder engine and a price tag under $600. Power was a luxury, not a birthright. Chevrolet's 6-cylinder Stovebolt had just toppled Ford's reign, outselling the aging Model A and taking the #1 spot in 1931. Ford's own dealers could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. Shoppers wanted more muscle for their money, and Chevy's affordable 6 was giving it to them. Henry Ford saw the writing on the wall. He wasn't just fighting for pride, he was fighting for survival. The answer wouldn't be another incremental upgrade. It had to be a moonshot, a V8 engine for the price of a Chevrolet. No one in Detroit believed it could be done. V8s were the crown jewels of the rich, with Cadillac and Packard charging 5, even 10 times what a working man could afford. The cost of building a V8 was astronomical. Just the tooling alone could bankrupt a company. But Ford was obsessed. He poured $50 million, more than $1 billion in today's money, into a gamble that most thought would sink the company. Every dollar was a bet against the laws of manufacturing, against the limits of metallurgy, and against the market itself. If Ford failed, Chevrolet's 6 would rule the roads, and Ford's empire would be just another footnote in the story of American industry. But if he succeeded, the V8 would no longer belong to the country club set. It would roar to life in every town, every farm, every back road in America. The stakes were nothing less than the future of the automobile and the future of Ford. Behind locked doors at Greenfield Village, the flathead V8 was taking shape in secret. Henry Ford's paranoia ran deep. Blueprints vanished into safes every night, and engineers worked in isolation, forbidden to share progress with colleagues across the hallway. Charles Sorensen, Ford's trusted lieutenant, later recalled the confusion. Nobody outside of Henry himself ever saw the full picture. Teams chased the same goal from different angles, each convinced they were the only ones on the trail. Ford pitted his own men against each other, sometimes scrapping months of work without warning. The atmosphere was tense, almost claustrophobic, with every conversation shadowed by the threat of being fired for saying too much. The pressure was relentless. 7 days a week, engineers hunched over sketches and hand-built prototypes, improvising solutions to problems no one had solved before. Ford's demand for a single-piece cast-iron block, an industry first, turned the Rouge foundry into a battlefield. Molten metal poured into complicated sand molds, but the results were disastrous. Nearly half of the early engine blocks came out cracked or riddled with pinholes, destined for the scrap heap before ever seeing a car. Foundry logs from 1931 and 1932 reveal row after row of defective castings, while exhausted workers scrambled to keep up with Henry's impossible pace. $50 million vanished into this hidden war room, more than most automakers spent in a decade. Each failure was loaded by night onto trucks and hauled away, out of sight from prying eyes and nosy reporters. Ford's managers issued strict orders. No one outside the project was to know how close they were to disaster. Yet, in a twist that left engineers speechless, Henry himself once summoned GM's Alfred Sloan to a private viewing of a nearly finished prototype, as if to taunt his rivals with what he'd soon unleash. Inside the plant, though, the mood was anything but triumphant. Every defective block pushed the company closer to the edge. The promise of affordable V8 power was becoming a ticking time bomb, primed to explode the moment Ford tried to deliver it to the world. The morning papers called it the most important car launch in a generation. March 1932. Ford's new V8 burst onto the scene with a roar of headlines and showroom fanfare. Dealers dressed their windows in banners and streamers, promising Cadillac power for a working man's paycheck. The numbers were stunning: 221 cubic inches, 65 horsepower, and a sticker price that made even Chevy's salesmen sweat. Crowds lined up outside dealerships from Detroit to Los Angeles, eager to lay hands on the first affordable V8 in history. But celebration turned to chaos almost overnight. The first 4,000 cars trickled out, and the trouble started rolling back in. Engines overheated on the drive home. Coolant leaked onto garage floors. Some buyers barely made it out of the lot before their new pride and joy coughed, sputtered, and died. Dealers scrambled to keep up, their service bays jammed with angry customers and mechanics working double shifts. Ford's warranty department was flooded with claims: cracked blocks, blown head gaskets, engines that seized up before the first oil change. It wasn't just a few lemons. Internal reports tallied thousands of failures, a disaster hidden behind the glossy ads and smiling salesmen. Newspaper editors who had praised Ford's bold gamble now turned skeptical. Headlines shifted from Ford's V8 revolutionizes motoring to buyers beware, V8 woes plague launch. Acres of unsold cars sat behind dealerships, waiting for repairs that might never come. Some dealers offered desperate incentives: free repairs, trade-ins, even cash back, just to move the flawed cars off their lots. For Ford loyalists, it felt like betrayal. Trust in the brand wavered as word spread that the revolutionary engine was more trouble than triumph. The flathead V8's promise of power for the people was quickly overshadowed by the reality of mass frustration and mounting losses. The celebration was over. Now came the reckoning. The flathead V8's greatest strength was also its undoing. In the quest to make a V8 cheap enough for the masses, Ford's engineers turned to the side valve, or flathead, layout, a design that made the engine block simple to cast and easy to assemble. But this shortcut came with a hidden cost. Instead of placing the valves overhead, Ford buried them in the block itself. That meant every gulp of air and fuel had to snake around sharp corners, making two tight 90-degree turns, before it could reach the combustion chamber. The path was anything but direct, and the engine struggled to breathe at high speeds. It was like trying to run a marathon while breathing through a bent straw. To keep costs low and avoid knocking on the cheap gasoline of the day, Ford set the compression ratio at just 5.5 to 1. That number, stamped in every service manual, left a mountain of untapped power on the table. The flathead ran smooth and quiet, but its punch was dulled before it ever left the factory. Mechanics and racers would later joke that the engine was asleep until you woke it up with a wrench. The most infamous flaw was lurking in the heart of the block. Instead of routing exhaust gases out through separate manifolds, Ford's design sent them straight through internal passages inside the cast iron. Hot exhaust snaked between the cylinders, turning the entire engine into a heat sink. Coolant boiled, cylinder walls warped, and owners learned to keep a watchful eye on the temperature gauge. In summer, flatheads sometimes steamed like kettles at a roadside picnic. Mechanics grew used to changing head gaskets and patching leaks as part of regular maintenance. Yet, for every owner cursing a boiled-over radiator, there was a young tinkerer who saw nothing but opportunity. The flathead's simplicity made it a blank canvas, one that begged for bigger carbs, sharper cams, and clever fixes. Its flaws weren't just problems, they were invitations. The same design that left engineers shaking their heads would soon spark a revolution in American garages. On the twisting back roads of the American South, the flathead V8 found its wildest purpose. Bootleggers, hauling mason jars of illegal whiskey, needed more than nerve to outrun the law. They needed a car that could disappear into the night. The Ford V8 became their secret weapon. Its power was hidden under plain sheet metal, but with a few clever tweaks, it could leave any police cruiser in a cloud of dust. Carburetors were swapped for bigger ones, heads shaved for extra compression, and rear gears changed for quicker launches up the hills. Mechanics stripped out seats and soundproofing to save weight. Some even rigged hidden switches to kill brake lights or dump oil on the road behind them. Junior Johnson grew up in Wilkes County, North Carolina, where moonshine was a way of life. His family's garage doubled as a workshop for the fastest cars in the county. Johnson learned to tune a flathead by feel, adjusting timing, balancing triple carbs, and listening for the perfect roar. On a typical night, he'd load the trunk with jars, then hit the mountain roads at full throttle. Police might give chase, but they rarely caught up. Johnson later joked, "Flatheads let me make 3 runs a night, outrun the law, get paid, and not breathe a word to anyone." Lloyd C., another legend from Georgia, was just as famous for his driving as for his mechanical genius. Say's coupes ran high compression heads and lightened flywheels, giving him a jump off the line that left officers spinning their wheels. Police reports from the late 1930s read like tributes to the Flathead's speed. V8 Ford coupe last seen heading north, officers unable to maintain pursuit. These moonshiners weren't just running from the law. Every haul was a test of skill and nerve, a real-world proving ground for both driver and machine. The tricks they learned, how to tune for speed, how to handle a car at the edge, became the foundation for something bigger. When the time came to race for glory instead of survival, the same cars and the same men would fill the first NASCAR fields, turning outlaw ingenuity into American legend. Across post-war America, the Flathead V8 became the spark that lit a new kind of fire. Junkyards overflowed with used Fords, their battered bodies hiding engines just waiting for a second act. Returning GIs, armed with mechanical know-how from the trenches and airfields, saw these surplus flatheads as blank canvases. With little more than a wrench, a borrowed manual, and a few bucks saved from factory paychecks, young men across the country set out to build something faster, louder, and uniquely their own. Speed shops began to pop up in California and beyond, run by pioneers who saw the future in hot rodding. Vic Edelbrock, a former mechanic with a gift for experimentation, started tinkering with intake manifolds and camshafts in a small Los Angeles garage. His first catalog, printed on a single sheet, offered parts that promised an extra jolt of power: dual carburetor intakes, aluminum heads, and custom cam grinds. Edelbrock's shop became a magnet for dreamers and daredevils, each chasing that elusive extra mile per hour. Names like Ed Iskandarian and Ed Winfield joined the fray, inventing ever wilder ways to squeeze more speed from the stubborn old flathead. The aftermarket exploded almost overnight. Flathead heads, manifolds, and cams filled the pages of new catalogs, each promising to turn a humble V8 into a street or strip monster. The Ardoon overhead valve conversion, designed by Zora Arkus Duntov, offered a radical fix for the Flathead's breathing troubles, giving backyard racers a taste of European engineering. For the first time, real horsepower wasn't locked away in luxury showrooms. It was there for anyone with the guts to try and the grit to get their hands dirty. The Flathead V8 made speed democratic. In every small town, kids built their own legends, swapping tips at the local drive-in or wrenching late into the night. The engine's flaws became challenges to overcome, not barriers. With each new part bolted on, each timing tweak, the American hot rod was born, not in corporate boardrooms, but in the garages and alleyways of a restless generation. By the late 1940s, the Flathead V8's glory days were numbered. In 1949, Cadillac and Oldsmobile unleashed their new overhead valve V8s, engines that breathed deeper, ran cooler, and delivered more horsepower right out of the box. The Cadillac 331 and Olds Rocket V8 stunned the industry. 160 horsepower, high compression, and a modern layout that left the old side valve design gasping for relevance. Chrysler followed in 1951 with the Firepower Hemi, a 180 horsepower beast crowned with hemispherical heads and a reputation for bulletproof strength. Suddenly, the Flathead's simple charm was yesterday's news. The final blow landed in 1955 when Chevrolet rolled out its small block V8, 265 cubic inches, compact, cheap to build, and ready to take a pounding. Chevy's new engine packed 162 horsepower and could be tuned to run circles around the old Ford. In a few short years, the Flathead went from king of the street to second best. The horsepower race had a new set of rules, and the Flathead just couldn't keep up. The Flathead V8 story didn't end when Detroit shut down the line. In 1953, the final American Flathead rolled out with 255 cubic inches and 110 horsepower. A last gasp that still packed enough punch to thrill a new generation of drivers. But while the US moved on to overhead valve engines, the Flathead kept working, stubborn as ever. Across the Atlantic, French factories kept building Flathead-powered Simca and Unique trucks for decades. French army convoys ran these V8s through the mud and snow, right into the early 1990s. Mechanics in faded uniforms pulled parts from battered crates stamped with Ford's old logo, keeping those engines alive long after their American cousins were museum pieces. Meanwhile, on the salt flats of Bonneville, the Flathead V8 found new life as a weapon of speed. Modern racers, chasing legends, squeezed every last bit of power from these ancient blocks, bolting on superchargers, custom heads, and wild fuel mixes. Streamliners with Flathead hearts have blasted past 250 miles per hour, roaring across the white desert with a sound that echoes back to 1932. The SCTA's record books fill with names who refuse to let the Flathead die, proving that even an engine designed before World War II can challenge the limits of physics. In garages from California to Normandy, the Flathead V8 still fires up, still makes hearts race, and still refuses to fade away. In 1932, Ford stunned the world by launching a V8 engine that delivered 65 horsepower at a fraction of luxury car prices, an achievement backed by a $50 million gamble and years of secret development. Despite nearly half of the early engines being scrapped for defects, the Flathead V8 transformed America's roads, from moonshine trails to racetracks. FBI files and dealer records confirm its role in bootlegging, while the famous letter from Clyde Barrow to Henry Ford testifies to its outlaw reputation. Yet the full story of Ford's internal secrecy, including isolated engineering teams and missing memos, remains partly hidden in archives. The last Flathead-powered cars rolled off the line in 1953, but land speed records and continued use in France show its endurance. The evidence is clear. The Flathead V8's flawed design sparked a cultural revolution, proving high performance could be accessible to all. Its legacy, documented in race results, sales records, and surviving engines, still fuels America's fascination with V8 power.